Okay, so today's webinar will be about doing research, not development, and getting your research focused. And we hope that a general learning outcome is for you to understand the apparent, but apparently often mistaken, research and development dimensions in doctoral level research. Okay, so specifically, we hope that you would get a bit more understanding about how research and development are different, and also changing the understanding on the differences. Why research without development can usually earn you rather easier the doctoral degree than while vice versa, where you just would do development. And the R&D relation from a doctoral study perspective, and how to work from research to thesis. And in closing, we will have a group activity where we hope to get a reflective discourse on a newspaper article going that is looking into the blurring lines in between research and development, but also into critical matters that appear to still remain unquestioned. So with this, let's give it a go. So how are research and development different? Let us start from this OECD library document that I found, which I think is a good scene setting document. Research and experimental development comprises creative work undertaken on a systematic basis in order to increase the stock of human knowledge. So it's about knowledge, and to devise new applications based upon it. The term R&D covers three activities: basic research, applied research, and experimental development. And we will see through that thesis how that is perhaps not that straightforward as it reads here. Now, basic research is experimental or theoretical work undertaken primarily to acquire new knowledge of the underlying foundation of phenomena and observable facts without any particular application or use in view. Applied research is also original investigation undertaken in order to acquire new knowledge. It is, however, directed primarily towards a specific practical aim or objective. So applied and basic research are different with regards to one being open, the other practical, in accordance to this. Then experimental development, on the other hand, is systematic work drawing on existing knowledge gained from research and or practical experience, which is directed to producing new materials, products, or devices, to installing new processes, systems, and services, or to improving substantially those already produced or installed. Now let's dissect that. And so if basic research is experimental or theoretical work, and it's undertaken primarily to acquire new knowledge without any particular application or use in view. Applied research, on the other hand, is original investigation undertaken in order to acquire new knowledge. So both are having the objective to acquire new knowledge, but in the second case, directed primarily towards a specific practical aim or objective. Now, experimental development is, on the other hand, systematic work drawing on existing knowledge gained from research or practical experience. Now, we don't see here actually the differentiation in between, is it coming from basic research or is it coming from applied research? So there's a blurring in the argumentation and narrative. Continuum, which is directed to produce new stuff, anything, or to improving substantially already produced or installed stuff, anything. So again, here, it's not directly referenced to whether it comes from applied research or basic research, but it's implicitly assumed that basic research perhaps not directly can fuel into that area of advancement. Now, what we can see here, however, is that research is followed by development. So experimental development is systematic work that's drawing on existing knowledge, and that existing knowledge is produced through either basic or applied research, and that both create that knowledge. This is to say that research comes prior to development. So the R is in front of the D. And now this sounds simple and obvious. However, we will see that it might not be that obvious once it comes to the purpose of your thesis. What are you doing in your research work? Are you just doing research? Are you examining a problem? Or are you doing development? And if so, what will be the relation in between the two? And this is something we are going to look into, because as even that one paragraph wasn't consistent in itself, if I'm looking into what popular search engines are telling me, then they say, for example, applied research is a research methodology that creates practical solutions. Now you see the difference. Applied research is creating practical solutions. So we are already advancing and skipping the development part in the middle, but we directly go into applied research on the one hand and creating solutions on the other hand. While basic research is an approach to research that seeks to expand knowledge in a field of a study. Now, and here we explicitly exclude the basic research from the development. Now, it's already a quite different scenario than we've seen before. So then, applied research is solution-driven, while basic research is knowledge-specific. Or how is that relating to each other? So if applied research creates practical solution and basic research creates knowledge-specific, sure, but how and where is then the difference in between applied research and development? And where's the solution focus coming from out of the sudden? Now, as a research student, I think it is important for you to have clarity about what is exactly expected from you to be done in your research or in your development. So now let's look into 3 practical examples and how problem, solution, the development in the middle, and so might all belong to each other. Are there any questions to this point? Okay, so once again, let's look into how applied research is referred to. Applied research is designed to solve practical problems of the modern world rather than to acquire knowledge for knowledge's sake. One might say that the goal of the applied scientist is to improve the human conditions. For example, applied researchers may investigate ways to improve agricultural crop production, treat a cure of specific disease, improve the energy efficiency of homes. Now, does that mean that applied research focuses on creating solutions? So what am I doing once I'm executing applied research? Am I trying for testing out how to improve agricultural crop production? Am I testing how to treat or cure a specific disease? How do I improve the energy efficiency of homes? Now, we earlier learned that research comes before development. And let's look into this. So if the development objective is to improve agricultural crop production, then the applied research is not trying to improve agricultural crop production, but would rather be asking what are the issues that limit agricultural crop production. So you still focus on the problem end and to create new knowledge on that end. So it's still research, it's not development. Likewise, if the development objective is to treat or cure a specific disease, then the applied research would not try to just test and develop something that is curing a disease, but it would start with what are the limitations in the current disease treatment practices, right? And for the third example, if the development objective is to improve the energy efficiency of homes, offices, or modes of transportation, then the research would start by looking into what are the current energy inefficiencies of homes, offices, or modes of transportation. So while it's framed and while search engines might tell you, okay, applied research is creating solutions, what is omitted entirely in those simplified messages is how research as such is working, and that any development objective would be working over matching research questions, and that those research questions would look into the limitations that currently exist and prevent us from advancing our knowledge in that specific field, if that does make sense. So Experimental development is systematic work and knowledge that is produced through either basic or applied research, with both to create such knowledge. Those are the research questions. So there's a clear distinction between research and development. And no, the research question is not how to improve, but rather what are the issues and what is currently limiting us, if this differentiation makes sense. As said, in the basic timeline, research comes before the development, and typically, if it's called a research project, you would locate it in the left side down, but not in the right side. Typically, yes, it's not that easy and straightforward, as we will see in the next slides. So why research without development can earn you a doctorate degree, while vice versa, this can prove to be challenging? Let's look into that. Now, I've been looking out a bit, and to my understanding, there are indeed some doctoral programs which state, like here's the University of Valencia in Spain, that what you're expected to do is research or experimental development project. So there's an or. Now, does that mean I cannot do research, but just development? Likewise, the next university expects you, if you're undertaking a doctorate, that you do scientific research and experimental development. So here it's both sides that are expected. And the European Network for Conservation Restoration Education says that they would expect that doctorate studies would encompass basic research, applied research, experimental development, or a combination of this. So again, experimental development alone might be enough. Now, why this then is an issue? Why is experimental development perhaps not enough? Now, if we look here into the second quote, all UK doctorates, regardless of their form, continue to require the main focus of the candidate's work to demonstrate an original contribution to knowledge. Okay, in their subject field or profession through original research or the original application of existing knowledge or understanding. So now, if you're going down this path and would focus on development only, then make sure it's crystal clear to anyone, first of all, including yourself. And you should know on how you would approach the following when figuring out what the meaning of it would be. You are undertaking a research doctorate. So what is your thesis research project if you just would go down for development and develop some sort of solution? Would it become a thesis development project? Obviously, you can't call it research project. Likewise, what would be the understanding of the research problem? Would it become a development problem? Well, it sounds a bit like consultancy. Or change altogether towards a development project? That sounds like, well, way out of research. And what would be the expectation of original investigation undertaken in order to acquire new knowledge? And in the background that it must be systematically. How do you systematically develop anything and create new knowledge if there's no limitation and issue at the starting point? Now, I think it's critical for everyone to understand, as more as you move out of the R and move into the D, all of those traditionally known and tested and well understood things that are related to research, including doctoral research, become much more fluid. Yeah? Therefore, you should think about those things and discuss it with anyone who is involved. And yes, Tivare, the slides will be shared later, including the replay. So how would you make the case for being original? Would it be through the original application of existing knowledge, understanding, due to the fact that it's just you who had the idea that no one else had so far? Well, that accidentally could happen, but will you be one of those that got lucky? Or your skills are so unique that no one could achieve what you've been doing before? Well, of course, occasionally we see such high flyers, but are you one of those? Or there was no one bothering doing it so far? Well, then the question would be, why are you not bothering doing it? or your thesis supervisor told you to test something out, that's a clear case because your thesis supervisor would clearly know what are the problems, where is the state of the art, where are the limitations, because he's a senior scientist. He did all of that. So he can work with you and take you exactly to that point where the research problem is crystal clear, and there you continue. But then, is it your original contribution, or are you just executing the thoughts of someone else? Or it was impossible for others doing things thus far. That's a clear case, and let's look into this one further. If it was impossible for others doing it, that's a clear case. So there were problems that could not be overcome to date. So we are again back to the problem side. Problems that would need to be researched and fully understood first. So we are back to the R side. So then again, it's research that works over research problems. As in the earlier example of the 3 approaches that ask you to improve something, which entirely seemed to look for you asking how to do it better. Now, as we see here, we are again going back. We want to do things better. We want to develop, but we work over the limitations. So we again need to revert to the research. Can you see the trickiness in here? And why you should be well prepared to make your case once to deciding to focus more on development? I hope that comes out a bit. So, but then why do students have a preference for D? Well, there are many, and some of the more common ones seems to be that development is exciting. It's great to create solutions. That gives us the ego boost. We do greatness. So it's tempting to explore things that could be improved. On the contrary, looking into problems is hard and daunting. It's muddled. It's not like we want it to be. So we do not want to be there. We want where it's exciting, where it's great, not where it's dark and shady. So we are actually raised and educated our entire life to focus on solutions. What's the solution to that? To that? To what do you mean? Yeah, to that. And what's the problem? No solution. So therefore, we just do not know about how to engage with problems, be it in general or within a research context. And as a research student, I think it's paramount for you to understand that and to get clarity about that. So then, exactly, as a research student, what is a R&D relation from a doctoral study perspective? So on the other side, you see the research side. This is all what it takes to get your doctorate. Yeah, it's a problem focus. And on the lower end, you have the development side, which is, for example, in the business environment, something like a change idea where you want to improve something. Now, and this interplay is what doctoral studies often makes going wrong. And it's getting even worse once it comes to the literature review, because the literature review often focuses only on the development and therefore is looking into how to improve things rather than focusing on the upper end. So, but both of the things can be very well aligned. The thing is just, you need to focus and get the boundaries right. Now, there will always be, if you undertake research in the work environment, there will always be an ongoing development in the workplace, but you might not be part of that. Or at least your focus will not be on the lower end, but on the upper end, on conducting the research, even if the research is conducted around the lower end. And you can do that even in a very structured way, because if you talk, for example, about changes in the business environment, often those come using continuous improvement approaches, the Deming plan, do, check, act cycle. So this is very much structured. And actually, it's not totally unrelated to how you work in the research end. On the upper end, you see, for example, the action research cycle, which is quite comparable to what you can find in the business environment. For example, looking at the PDCA cycle. So, and the change idea from the business side can be connected to your research. So you can collect data from there It becomes a pool for your data collection. It becomes a pool for the framing of the further framing of the problem understanding. It can help you to further frame the problem and the literature review, and therefore both can go hand in hand. Now, but please note that the change idea comes from the business end. Again, that's the exciting part. You focus on the research, which means what is the research problem and what we will be looking at. If that is making sense thus far. So from a research perspective, the business environment or the environment from where you collect data is exactly that. It's an environment from where you collect data and where you engage with the stakeholders who are related to the problem. So this can be very well brought together. So there you see research and development going hand in hand in a very different relationship. You focus as a researcher on the research end, while the development end is going on in the business environment, but you are not the driver of development. And actually, if you look into a lab environment, let's compare that. Often, a scientist in a lab is also not doing all of the developments together. Like you want to develop a rocket, you won't develop it alone. You will focus on a tiny, tiny part of that. While there will be a big development team, like here in the lower case, that is doing the development, and you are carrying out your research just around a very tiny research problem related to that, right? So the other side, the tiny, tiny side is where you will stay, while the bigger side is what is going on and where you might or might not be part of. I mean, if you undertake research in a business environment and in an organization where you are working, then you likely will be part of that. So you sure have a role and stake in the development, which you should, for research purposes, try to separate from your role as a researcher. Now, the lower side provides you with the data, and the other side is where you carry out your research. So what is the difference in between doing R and doing R&D from a time perspective? Well, I would argue it can be a considerable one, because we already earlier said the required prior organizational knowledge to do R&D is comprehensive. The prior problem understanding is comprehensive, and therefore it will take more time if you do R&D. Likewise, if you're a research student, you are about to develop capabilities to distinguish between solution-focused and problem-focused actions. So you're still training that, meanwhile you engage in both. So that obviously can be confusing and therefore slow down your research. You will need higher communication capabilities if you mediate in between R&D. And the complexity of the thesis clearly will be higher if you engage in R&D. And with this also the likelihood of research going wrong or of research stopping because you just don't know how to take it further. So all of that should be deliberate decisions, and clarity should be sought upon start of your doctorate with the faculty, your supervisor, and your peers about what are you exactly expected to do. Yeah, don't take it lightly. So doing R&D in a nutshell is entirely feasible, but be aware of the challenge and of keeping the research focused on the problem, to not mix up both sides and to handle the complexity well. And ask yourself, do you have gained this comprehensive knowledge and understanding that it takes to do both? I mean, if you're in a lab environment or part of a team, then this comprehensive knowledge and understanding perhaps can be brought in by the team, by the work environment. So this is something that needs to be tested and worked out at the start of your research. And a slight note on cycles and building up of shared vocabulary. If you as a researcher engage with people in the work environment, then perhaps you want to make sure that there's a shared vocabulary. For example, the PDCA cycle and the action research cycle are from two opposite ends, one from the business environment, one from the research environment. But for practical purposes, if you look at that, pragmatically speaking, they are quite similar. So if you engage with people from the work environment, you might just stick to words that they knew and engage with them around those. So communication is crucial. Now, how to work from research to thesis? Well, you could, for once, capitalize on the established structures and visuals. If you manage to come up with a visualization of your research like that, that will show to anyone, including you, that you have a clear understanding about what you're doing. And if you have that clear understanding, then you can use that to reduce the noise. You can say, okay, there are boundaries to the left and to the right side, which are not part of my thesis. They do not belong to anything that I'm doing from the research perspective. And they also do not belong to anything I do for the data and findings and the engagement with stakeholders. And therefore, they won't be part of my thesis, but only the part in the middle will be what is showing up in my thesis. Now, while those images look neat and nice, research is not linear. It's chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, but no, it's not written up in a linear way only. You might want to try it, but you will see you always will go back because research is an evolving thing. Having said all that, check with your faculty and supervisor on how much of the D is really expected from your doctoral research, or how little, ideally, as well as on the expected nature of such D and the fundament of which the D is supposed to build on. Like, do you have the problem understanding? If not, how do you get that problem understanding? What is the fundament from where you start? Try to keep the complexity moderate. It will come in, complexity always comes in quicker as one wants to. So the more you focus on the research dimension, the lower the likelihood of your thesis research project going wrong. And get clarity about the basic. What more than the above illustration do I need to consider, and how did others do that? How do I want my research to be? My way or working over related studies? Now, if you want to have it my way, that will be the harder way, inevitably. If you work over related studies, that will provide you with all sorts of guidance that you need. And what are the expectations of my faculty, supervisor, and potentially further stakeholders, anyone who is engaged in that research? And what are my boundaries and what belongs together and how does it belong together? And finally, what will be the role of development within my research work? Again, it's crucial to understand what is the D in your research. Now, if you want to train that a bit further, then take a look at our advanced training course on writing up and structuring your thesis, which comes in 3 formats: 3 self-study with peer support, fully tutored or flexible on demand feedback. And if you're just at the starting of your doctoral research project, we also have other courses that focus on issue identification and to work out which type of methods and related literature you might want to use in your research. Now, with this, we come into the group activity, and with this, go off the recording.